and welcome everyone to No Cabin Fever today. I'm Michaela from Scandio, and with us today is Christian Reichert from Resolution. His talk is about taking control of Jira and Confluence API, and I will now hand over to Christian, so please enjoy.
So thank you very much and welcome. Let me just quickly start my presentation and share my screen. So you hopefully see my screen now. Well, just as a quick introduction, I'm Christian Reichert. I'm one of the co-CEOs of Resolution. And if you're in the Atlassian world, you might have known us for some of our identity and user management apps, particularly, especially the single sign-on one and UserSync. In terms of, we have lots of customers and lots of well-known customers with large internet-attached instances, which is also one of the reasons why I actually come through to the point of APIs and protecting your APIs, and also an app that we developed to that need that a lot of these kind of customers approach us with. But a little bit of background first. In terms of what is an API, most of you probably know. It's a way that we can, this is actually PAW, where you can access a REST API and see the results. It's basically a way to access, in our case, Jira or Confluence, and get some structured data back. So on the, you see I did a get here with a REST path to myself to get information about the user that I'm logged on with. And on the right, you see the structured data we get back. And here my display name, for example, Christian Reichert, which you see in there. So APIs are used all over the place to facilitate machine-to-machine communication. Virtually anything, if you integrate it with Jira, Confluence, or to link 2, 3, 4 applications together, is done via APIs. And one of the most common ways today is REST APIs. But let's have a look about the authentication of that. So if I look at that REST call again, you see that I had to enter my password. Yeah, username, Reichert, resolution.de, and password, try it, that's not my password, called it's not secure. And then in that REST API call, it actually gets added as an authorization header, basic here with this long string, starting with YY, down in the second red box. Looks fairly cryptic, seems to be okay. Maybe not so much. So if I just take that cryptic string and run it through a base64 decoder, you actually see creichert.com column, it's not secure, as sort of the second thing. So this header really has my clear text password in it. So anyone who can intercept that call can actually get to my password. But intercepting that call is actually not my biggest worry, because it's typically in a good secured instance, it's transported via HTTPS, so it's already encrypted. Let's say at least a decent chance that that's not being caught. However, what happens if I start some of the integrations that we all know and love? So if you're more of a developer, you certainly have seen sort of these kind of snippets of codes where I can take one of the Jira client libraries of my language of choice, put in the Jira URL, put in the username and the password, and then can start writing stuff to do it. This small script is Python, and it lists, it gives you essentially a list of projects. But that means here my username and password is actually hard-coded in that script. And it's actually hard-coded my password in clear text. But even if you're not a developer, if you're a little bit more tech-savvy, then you might have used services like Zapier, Automate.io, if this then that, Microsoft Flow, or many of the other kind of services that tell you, oh, we can integrate with Jira, or we can integrate with Confluence. You know? And I've got lots of Zapier stuff that sends me notification, writes stuff into Excel lists, etc. that is integrated. But on the right side, you actually then see the mask to set up that integration. Again, here, Zapier asks me for my username, my password, and then on the bottom, the server URL, which actually means Zapier gets hold of my clear text username and password for my Jira instance. And the not so funny thing about that is they actually have to store it in clear text in some way, or in a way that they can retrieve the clear text. Because in order to send that basic authentication header that I've showed you before, they need the clear text password. Yeah. In Jira, for example, your password is never stored in clear text. It's hashed, it's salted, many times encrypted. And if you try to log in that login mask, you enter your password, and then that same thing is done with your password, hashed, salted, many times encrypted, and then the resulting string is compared. So if the Jira database gets lost, it's a lot less bad, because a hacker still needs to try to reverse engineer your password, compared to if services like this gets hacked, or you check in your script into Bitbucket with your password in there, for example, because that's clear text. There is not a lot of things that have to be done to reverse engineer that. So yeah, what's the problem? I started to talk a little bit about that already. First of all, in general, this more or less uncontrolled use of API can leak and expose data. So if I, as an admin, allow everyone to connect their Zapier, their scripts and that stuff, that's a great thing for convenience and personal automation and stuff. But I, as an admin, also lose a lot of control over where does my data go. Yeah, and also to a degree, some of the protections, because if you enter your password into Zapier, Zapier can essentially do whatever you as a user can do in your Jira. If you're an admin, well, then Zapier can do all the admin actions as well. If you are just a normal user, it can still create, delete, whatever rights you have in your Jira or Confluence. Also, very often, customers connect their Jira to Active Directory or some other sources of authentication, so that you don't necessarily have a specific password just for Jira. It probably is the password you use to log into your PC as well, or to your enterprise network, those kind of things. So if you save that information on Zapier and it gets lost, it very often also means that whoever the attacker is doesn't just get access to your Jira or Confluence, which might be bad enough. He might get access to your file services, to your VPN, to a lot of the other things that you as a company employee actually have access to. And that is particularly dangerous, because most large attacks that have happened in the past were not just where one thing got lost, but where people found a way in, like with this kind of password and the enterprise password, and then went from system to system to system until they found a way to elevate their privileges, and then they had their jackpot. And the other thing, what's very common, is that that kind of access gets forgotten. Yeah, you configure Zapier, it's not really, you even forget about it. Yeah, you don't delete the rule you set up, even if you don't use it anymore, or you might delete the rule, but you forget to actually remove the password from the app integrations that Zapier has. So Zapier retains that access even without you or your admin node. So what controls does Jira or Confluence give me here? None, really. There's nothing you can easily do on Jira or Confluence in terms of settings, all that stuff, to restrict API usage, or to make sure, or to only grant it to certain users, or to only grant it in certain ways. Yeah. So it's not even all or nothing, because even Jira Confluence, you can't really turn it off. So what do we see our customers do? Well, one relatively blunt tool is to put a reverse proxy in front of it, and just don't allow the API used via via basic authentication, or sometimes even via something like auth, which is another authorization method, by just blocking or by just overwriting that header. So if you can see that, that's a statement you would use in Nginx reverse proxy. We just bluntly overwrite the authorization header so that no basic authentication goes through. But that's much more all or nothing. There's a little bit you can tweak on Nginx based on IP addresses and some other things, or the path being used, but it's not very much. Yeah. So generally, this is either you allow it for everyone or you allow it for no one. But this is not really done. So there is actually a lot of our large customers where that was really the only tool they had to make sure that, for example, API usage in this way is only being done from the internal network or from certain parts of the network, but cannot be done from the internet, for example. So then there's the other extreme, which is web application firewalls, which you can put in front of your Jira Confluence that inspect every call and are really there to protect your application that in that instance Confluence to Jira. So there's a lot more control you have there, but it's also a quite expensive proposition to have that, not just because of the additional hardware or virtual server and licenses that you need to run that. It's typically also something where you need someone relatively competent in this whole thing to be able to set this up. So it's hard to set up, needs a lot of knowledge, and I've not seen any good defaults or presets for Jira Confluence, but so far, so you typically have that kind of system then in a mode that it learns for many weeks, and then you can start tuning it down and being specific what you want to allow or disallow in general. But one of the things then you can nail down a little bit more is the use of the REST API, for example. But this is, and again, some of our customers do that and have done that because of out of necessity. But it's a tough nut to crack with application firewalls. That with many of the ideas, that with many of the I mean, a lot of our app ideas and features we actually got from the problems that our customers face. So it's not always us having just grandiose ideas. I think, if anything, it's us listening to our customers. And the internet actually came up with a solution, or sort of a solution for that problem, and it's called API tokens. So our app for that for Jira and Confluence is called API Token Authentication. So sometimes it's also referred to as not API tokens, but personal access tokens. That what, for example, Bitbucket and Bamboo calls it. Microsoft calls it app-specific passwords, etc. It's a pretty common standard way in the internet. And if you're a developer, you definitely have used API tokens, API keys before, no doubt. So Atlassian Cloud uses it, Bitbucket, Office 365, Salesforce.com, you name it. Most of the services implement it, but unfortunately not Confluence or Jira Server or Data Center. So what is a token? You can essentially see it a little bit like a very complex password for specific use. Yeah. For example, I pasted one of the tokens that we generated. You see this very, very long string here. And what also makes it nice is that it's usually scoped. And what's meant with that is that it's usually limited in what it can do. So what a token can do. Think, for example, read only, or think it can only be used from certain sources, IP addresses, for example, so that okay, this is my, I need to disable that. This is my reminder to pack up and go home on a normal day. So nevertheless, scoped, limited to what it can do. So this is, all of this is done to essentially limit the damage this kind of token can do when it gets out of hand. Or, I mean, this doesn't take away that the service like Zapier needs to save it in clear text. So if they get hacked, then at least you reduce the kind of damage this kind of token can do. Or sometimes if you limit it very well to IP addresses and those kind of ranges and those kind of things, it might actually be even completely useless to an attacker. And what you also do is you generate one token per application that you integrate. Most of the time it's also time limited, but you make it out to be valid for a year or 2 years, for example, or 6 months, that it's not valid forever. So all of those things are to limit the damage if it gets out of hand or make it even completely unusable. So just to give you 1, 2, 3 screenshots, it's relatively easy to create tokens. If you use our app, basically have a tab which is Token Authentication. You can say a new API token, you select how long it should be valid, and afterwards the token gets created and you get your API token, which you can then use. And you can create an unlimited amount of tokens, which you can see in a list. And if one of those gets lost or you don't need it anymore, you just delete that token. And instead of, for example, changing your password and you have to go back to all the other integrations and change it there as well, you just remove one token and you basically disable that service from being accessible. And even an admin can do that centrally for you. So if Zapier gets hacked, he can search for all the tokens that have, for example, Zapier in the description and disable them quickly. Also, from an admin perspective, there's a lot more that I can actually do. So instead of just that everyone can have those tokens, I can actually nail down the permissions so that only a certain group of people can create tokens or use tokens. Or I could do it in a way, for example, that admins can create, or a certain amount of people can create tokens for other users, then communicate them back to them, and the other users can use them, which a lot of our enterprise customers actually ended up doing, that someone requests a token to be used with a certain application, and an approval workflow gets that token and then can use it. And therefore the admin or the IT guys can be in control what kind of third-party integrations there are. So just back to this. That's actually the main thing I wanted to tell you a little bit about APIs. I think it's very often one of the things that we tend to forget, or even as admins, it's one of the problems we're sort of aware of, but tend to ignore because we don't want to turn it off completely, to still leave the convenience and usefulness. But most of us, or how the customer described it the other day, yeah, I was never really comfortable having my password in that script. Yeah, and I think that is the feeling that a lot of us share towards those. And I certainly hope that with this, you can be a little bit more aware of the problem. And even if you use a blunt tool like disable it for everyone, think about doing that. If you're a user, then think about, before you create those integrations, that those integrations get access to your Jira in the same way you have access to it. And be a little bit aware of that. If you stop using something, think about it once in a while and remove those integrations. And with tokens, that's super easy. But even if it's not tokens, then you can still go back into Zapier and delete the connection when you don't need it anymore. So even as a user, be a little bit careful and aware of that you shouldn't leave those things dangling around. So that was my 15 minutes. I hope you found it useful on a topic. If you're interested in our app, then look in the marketplace, API Token Authentication with the orange logo, or get in touch with me. But even if not, then maybe think about APIs as something great, but also something that has some security risk attached. if you're not on top of it.
So thank you very much, Christian. If there are any questions from the audience, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Looks like there are 2 questions.
Yeah. First one, are server customers sometimes worried to let an app handle something as sensitive as API tokens? Not really, I think, or put it the other way around. If it's anything that has to do with authentication, which tokens are, which our single sign-on apps are, for example, then very often some of the larger enterprise customers go through a certain amount of security vetting. So ask us about our development practices, about our security practices. And one of the things we, for example, do is we're part of a bug bounty program from Atlassian, the marketplace bug bounty program, including our server apps. So we are the launch partner for the server app side for that as well. So we do get a lot of questions that people want to make sure that that it's a trustworthy app that they buy. But once you can give them that comfortable way, then it's usually not an issue. And then the other one are third parties that integrate with Jira starting to accept API token auth. Yeah, that is a fantastic point, which I think I had it on the slide somewhere, but didn't really mention it too much. In the way we actually implemented the API token authentication, you can just use it as a password. Yeah. So that's the nice thing, because changing all of those third-party applications, I mean, in a perfect world, you would say don't use basic auth anymore. Use something like auth, even that's still better, but not perfect. But that means changing all those third-party applications to do that. And that's relatively impossible. And that is why API token in general in the internet is sort of a good stopgap solution for that. And the way we implemented it in Jira and Confluence, you can just send in the place where you usually send your password, you just put the API token and it works. So that means that with those third-party applications, there are no problems, and we're not dependent on them to implement any other bearer or something token system. They can just, yeah, like I said, username, password, just use the token instead of the password and you're fine. So I hope that answers the 2 questions.
Yeah, so thank you, Christian. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. We are back on Monday with the Atlassian Community Berlin special at 6 o'clock. And the topic is achieving fast, smooth, and predictable delivery of customer value with Kanban analytics from Sonja Sidorova from NAVE. So have a wonderful time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Have a great weekend. Thanks. Bye-bye.